Hello out there. We welcome you to our general board meeting, which we are live from Nashville, Tennessee. As most of you all know, every 4 years after our general conference, we host a board meeting in December to recalibrate ourselves and get going for the following year. And this year we are live here from Nashville, Tennessee. I am so happy to be with you. As most of you know, my name is Antoine Seawright. I bring you greetings from the 7th Episcopal District in South Carolina, where Bishop Samuel L. Green is my bishop. And shout out to him. And of course, in the 9th Episcopal District, my uncle, Bishop Harry L. Seawright and Supervisor Seawright, I extend my heartfelt greetings on their behalf as well. We are so excited about what the dialogues to come will bring while we're here at our board meeting. We have some interesting guests, some dynamic guests, and I'm just so happy that you all would tune in. As always, remind us about where you're from, your district, your elder, your bishop. If you want to extend happy holiday greetings, we welcome that, as Jesus is the reason for all of our seasons. However, we do not mind telling our brothers and sisters across the world, literally I mean across the world, in the AME faith, and those who perhaps may not, we do not mind extending holiday seasons, because God is the reason for all of our seasons. I am so thrilled and I feel blessed not only to be in Nashville, but to have a real anchor in the greater Tennessee community. If you have traveled to this area or been through this area, you probably know his father, because his father served in the state legislature. But even on the legacy and the shoulders of his father, he now stands strong. He's the pastor of Lee Chapel AME Church. He's a state legislator, graduate of Tennessee State, college degree from Vanderbilt University, master's degree, and also a PhD from Tennessee State. He is well trained, well elevated thanks to the favor of God, his wife Leah, and so many incredible things about this brother. And I'm just so happy to have Tennessee's own right here with me. Welcome to the Christian Recorder.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
For those of you pastor, I don't know which one we can call you, these big fancy titles, but for those of you for those at home who may not have been introduced to you properly by way of my introduction, give us some true background color about who you are, your background, and a little bit of your testimony, because everything I've read, everything I've been told, and by your body of work, it's a pure demonstration not only of your dedication to the kingdom, but your dedication to serving God's people.
No, I appreciate that, and thank you again for having me here to discuss so many things dealing with the church and where we are as a nation and as a state. Harold Love Jr., pastor of Lee Chapel AME Church, State Representative, House District 58, which is here in Nashville. Have 4 HBCUs in my district: Tennessee State University, Fisk University, Meharry Medical College, and American Baptist College. I really want to go back to something you said about my father being elected, because I want to tell a story about perseverance. My father served in the State House from 1968 to 1994, but I lost my first 3 elections. I ran for the State House in 98, lost. Ran again in 2000, lost. Ran for Metro Council in 2007, lost. I lift it up because I think oftentimes people think that if you are a junior or you are the daughter of someone already in office, that it is just an automatic that you'll be in office. And so the first loss I did not appreciate. The second one I really didn't appreciate. The third one I was like, Lord, I'm done.
So you had a little arrogance and you had a little entitlement spirit too.
And after that, I'll be honest with you, 2010, I never shall forget, floods hit Nashville, Tennessee. I was pastoring St. Paul AME, and I got a chance to lead efforts in an area to do flood mitigation. And after that situation, I really was more tuned into my call and ministry. And 2012 came around, and people were saying, you should run for state rep again. I said, no. And I prayed to the Lord. I said, Lord, you know what? I don't want to be in office. I don't want to be a state representative. And the spirit in me from the Lord said, and that's why I'm now going to give it to you, because you are out of it now. Right? It's no longer about you. You don't want to be it now. And I won. And I'm grateful for those 3 losses, because it also allowed me to be able to say, I know what it's like to lose an election and get back up. A colleague of mine said, Harold, why don't you do out of office what you would have done in office? If you want to reduce crime in your community, get out there and do some neighborhood watch. If you want to help kids receive better education, tutor some kids up to school. If you want to see things be better, you go do it without the title. That way folks will know, and you will know also whether you genuinely want to do it. So,
in other words, ministry
yeah,
without an official license.
exactly.
One could count it as that.
Sure, sure. But I will give full credit to the AME Church, because that's where I cut my teeth. We all know with our YPD training and all the training we went through with that, it allowed me to be able to provide some leadership in the community because of what I went through in the church. And I'm grateful to have been able to pastor the church I've pastored. And again, I didn't just go straight to lead. I went to a smaller church in Columbia, Tennessee, Hopewell AME, where they had 26 on the roll, 12 showing up. I became the preacher and the choir director, all those things. And so it really helped me also learn to do the administrative work of the church and understand that you go get trained, you go engage in the process of helping your community, and in due time, these doors will open for you.
Rep, talk to us about, first of all, your church, and talk to us from the perspective of, because in our society, there's some who believe that church and politics should not collide.
Yeah.
And when they do collide, it's usually some criminal activity,
Sure.
or it's the devil involved,
Yeah.
as some of the folks I've heard
Right.
say in my lifetime. So talk to us about why those things should be on a head-on collision course,
Sure.
and how they're good for kingdom building.
Very interesting. My dissertation was on African American clergy engaging in politics and policy formulation. And so I did a deep dive then about why some clergy don't engage and why some do. And the whole thesis was that clergy who do engage believe in liberation theology. They believe that the story of Moses leading children out of Israel to Canaan was not just for that time and that period. I likened it to the man at the pool of Bethesda is a example of inadequate health care in our society.
That's good.
I linked the whole piece about, again, the Israelites in Egypt as a labor dispute, right? Fair wages, people not getting paid. And so for me, there was a linkage. For me, it made sense. For me, it made complete sense to engage in the process as the pastor of a church that has a history of engaging and making sure that social justice is at the forefront of our minds and our conversations. Interesting enough, one of the questions in the dissertation focus was, do you believe that you should help reduce gang violence? Do you believe that reducing drug addiction is just as important as Wednesday Bible study? Do you believe that increasing housing is just as important as Sunday worship? And oftentimes people respond yes, but then the next step is, will you write an op-ed? Will you engage in voter registration? Will you sit on a board? And many times the response was, I'm afraid that if I do, I might lose church mission. And if you lose church mission, then you have a situation where the lay folks, won't see you as being true to the call in ministry, because they'll see you more focused on politics. And so for me, it's a natural connection. I think for me, being born the son of a state representative, but then being called into ministry allowed me to even further see the connection of those two. Watching my father be a loyal member of our church, who was there every Sunday, who was there for Sunday school, embodied this whole notion that just because he was a politician didn't mean he was not a Christian. And so for my father, the two were always together, because God called him to engage in making our lives better. And so
Pastor, what if you had to describe the 3 top issues you think are facing this country and God's people? Because I think those 2 things are hand in hand. One for the Father, one for the Son, one for the Holy Spirit.
Sure.
What do you think those 3 issues would be?
Coming out of the last year and a half, we have to say healthcare. And I think we can either say healthcare or say healthy lifestyles.
Sure.
Right? And so we don't want to just talk about access to hospitals and access to doctors, but also the elimination of food deserts. So it's all wrapped up in there. That if we have a hospital where folks have access, but we don't have fresh fruits and vegetables in grocery stores in black neighborhoods, then we're just gonna have people going to the hospital. So for me, it's healthcare, healthy lifestyles. I think also we must say education.
Yeah.
And really talking about pre-K through higher ed.
Train up a child.
Yes, because we're talking about a situation where if we be honest with ourselves, we talk about the level of education that most of the folks in our community are getting, right? They're getting access, but not a certain level, which means that they're not getting people in front of them who look like them, who care about them. They're not getting access to the best technology. Even in Nashville, right? We are woefully behind many other states in education. We're 46 in the nation in Tennessee in education funding. And so what it says to me is we have black and brown kids who aren't getting textbooks, oftentimes in their classrooms. They're not getting technology. There are some schools in Nashville that have smart boards, but our kids don't have laptops. And we saw this also happen when you gave laptops and had internet access that was not there during the pandemic. So education, healthcare, and I would dare say that I think along with that, education, healthcare, and housing. Housing, let me back up. Education, healthcare, and voting rights. Let me change that.
That's right.
Because I think the voting rights piece gets all the other stuff in there. And if we don't have the voting rights piece, the housing will not matter because we don't have folks in place.
You cannot govern if you do not win. And in this country, we settle political differences,
Yep.
disputes, and intervention happen at the ballot box.
Sure.
And so voting rights is probably, I describe it, Rep, as the most consequential issue of our day, the same way it was the most consequential issue of my sharecropping grandparents' day.
Sure. I mean, when you talk about voting rights, and I remind my colleagues from time to time, the fact that in our founding documents of this country, we would say that a person of a particular ethnicity and heritage is 3/5 of another person, then we must know that that type of definition only refers to when you're counting folks to be in Congress. And if it was that important to say that we were 3/5 of a person for purpose of counting who should be in Congress, to your point, where decisions are made about differences and policy is made, then it has to be that important that we engage in voting rights, and the sanctity of voting also determines who governs, right? Judges are either
At the
elected,
table,
yes,
on
sir.
the menu.
Yes, sir. Or outside, not able to get in to even get at the
talking
table.
good now.
You see, so what we're talking about is judges are either appointed or elected. If they're appointed, they're appointed by someone who was elected.
Right.
So even the last few months of seeing court cases should remind us of how important it is to be at the table, deciding what policy is made. The conversation around what we'll teach our kids in history of this country is being decided in policy. The issue of housing has always been on the table. So the voting piece is extremely important because now it's not just president, governor, mayor, it's school board.
It's definitely a school board. It's a made-up issue that people who do not look like us,
Right.
people who don't have the same experiences as ours, define as critical race theory. I was in Virginia, advising the races in Virginia not too long ago, and if you ask the average person on the street who's blowing this horn about critical race theory, Rep, they can't even tell you what
That's
it
right.
is.
That's right.
The only thing they say is, well, it's a thing.
Sure.
Well, what is a thing? What does that even mean?
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure you've probably seen it firsthand in a place like Tennessee, where finding Democrats is probably like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
It is.
Not like South Carolina.
It is. And the unfortunate thing about it is this, and we tell folks, when you engage in this boogeyman effect, right, that there's this deep, dark, dangerous thing out there, and if we don't stop it now, right? I remember my first year in the legislature, we were, and I forget the bill that was proposed, but the gentleman proposing the bill said, if we don't do it now, we'll be in trouble. It's on its way.
For the next 100 years.
And so I raised my hand, I said, just tell me. I said, where is it now? He said, well, it's in California. I said, well, let me ask you. I said, because I like when the weatherman tells me that the storm is moving, if he can show me how fast it's moving so I can prepare for it. I said, is it moving? He said, not yet, but it's on the way.
On your mark.
Right.
Get ready.
Right. And so I said, I understand your point. I said, but I just don't like us making policy for things that are on the way and we cannot see if it really is on the way. And I think that's exactly what happened with critical race theory, right? The boogeyman of it came about because there was a subject that needed to be attached to a new effort to reduce black voter engagement and black voter participation.
Right. I tend to study history and trends and patterns in politics because what I know. Every election cycle is something used to do a couple things that have been successful, I think, hallmarks of people who do not share the same interests as us. It's fear, frustration, anger, and confusion.
Sure.
And when you talk about this issue of critical race theory before it was defund the police, Before that, it was the migrants coming,
Yes.
bringing diseases and illnesses.
They're always on their way.
From the border. They're
Yeah.
on the way with their big buses. I mean, every election cycle is something new. And so, as people of color and people of faith, we've got to start conditioning our hearts and minds that we've got to start to ignoring the noise and really focus on the lyrics that exist out here in the ecosystem.
Yeah, and I think your point is exactly right, because part of the issue is that we don't do deep dives into what I call chasing that footnote, right? You have to chase the footnote in your research. You can't just go on the first level. You got to find out, well, who quoted them and who really wrote this the first time. So we talk about this issue of what's used, whether it is issues around policing, issues around education. It's important for us to educate our folks to say, when you have conversations around issues of the history of this country, be as well equipped as you can to present the facts. For example, I'm in the process leading a committee now that has discovered how much money the state of Tennessee owes Tennessee State University.
John Thomas was telling me about that earlier.
Land grant arrearage, right? And so it's $544 million.
It's a lot of money.
And so my colleagues would say, listen, how do we know that that's the amount? I said, well, what I did was I went back to the law from 1913, where the General Assembly then said that the University of Tennessee's money would go straight to them, TSU's money would go to the state treasurer. I said, so this was a law that was written. I said, so it's not my opinion. It's not my emotions. These are the facts. I said, and federal law says the money is supposed to go to Tennessee State. So we have to build our cases like that to say we're dealing in fact, right? And the fact is these schools are underfunded and they need to be taken care of in a better manner. And then it's not emotional. And in the same manner, we have to equip our folks when we talk about lack of resources in our neighborhoods. It's not just that we dreamed of redlining, right? This actually happened. The Federal Housing Administration did say if you're a builder, you will not get subsidized money for these houses you build if you build them for black families. Redlining is not a theory, it's not our emotions. They literally would grade a community, A, if it didn't have any black folks or immigrants in it, D, if they did. So these are facts, and we're saying the effects of redlining and the effects of discriminatory housing are still having an effect on our folks. And so we have to equip our people with the tools to be able to refute these emotional responses from other folks, I think.
Before we get closer to the cross for a second, I do want to do a little more deeper dive into part of our education and informing when it comes to politics, because the AME Church does not endorse candidates or causes one way or another, collective as a church. But you're a state rep. That means you get elected the same way the president does. What happens with our people sometimes, Rep, is that we get so focused on what's going on upstream, we don't focus on the things that are happening downstream. I like to couch it this way. The closer your government is to you,
Sure.
the more important it is for you.
Sure.
Educate us briefly and our people who are watching around the world about how important those races down the ballot are, just as much as every 4 years the presidential race.
Sure. I would say this, more than likely, unless you really have a great relationship with the president, if you have an issue in your state, the phone call to his or her office is not going to be answered immediately.
Might even be able to pick up the phone.
Right. The emails may not be responded to immediately. Right?
Could take two more presidents.
It's two more presidents. Getting to see them, in casual conversation in the grocery store, right? And so I think that the state level is a sweet spot. I think that when you talk about the city level, you're so close to the folks that you do get inundated with the things of the stop signs and the stoplights and the sidewalks and issues around those things that you really must pay attention to, which is why they're so vitally important to make sure that we have good folks at the local level. The federal level, again, is so high that oftentimes they're dealing with issues of international policy, they're dealing with issues of international trade, they're dealing with issues of things for the country in general. But when you have that state level representative or senator, they're the ones that, number one, are dealing with policies around your colleges, right? Tuition increases. They're also dealing with issues around highway construction or highway repairs. They're dealing with issues around how long it's going to take you to get out of school, right? Whether you have to take 2 classes for electives to graduate from high school or 10. And so there's a role for every level to play. I love the state level and I like what we do there, but to your point, you must elect people at the state level and local level just like you would at the federal level, because at the end of the day, that is the closest person to you, and what they engage in oftentimes is sorting out, as I would say, what the federal level does. I like to use an example of the transformer at your house or at your business. The electricity comes through that power line from the main power supply. It can't go straight to your house without a transformer tamping down the electricity.
Reverend, let's flirt with this idea HBCUs, perhaps the most consequential vehicle for communities that look like ours,
Sure.
in order for us to really move toward that perfect union, that sweet spot
Sure.
in this country we all read about in the 3rd grade. Very briefly talk about the role, as you see, from where you sit, of HBCUs in this country.
HBCUs, I think, provide African American students with that period in their life where they will, one, be able to make connections with people before they become these tremendous superstars and heads of industry, and develop a real genuine
But like
relationship
yourself.
with them. I got some friends who are doing great ones. I'm just glad to know them. To make those connections. The second thing it does, it provides for you the opportunity to meet other children of the African diaspora, right, who you may never come in contact with in this space, this safe space, again, these 4 years or 5 or 6, where you can matriculate and learn about different cultures, even within the United States. I think it also provides you that space where you have teachers who will pour into you all that you will need to be able to matriculate outside of that college degree to survive in this world. It's a nurturing environment because many of our schools, K through 12, may have been in a situation where you didn't have a teacher who looked like you. But in HBCU, you have the chance again to meet wonderful people that will again be leaders of industry when you all finish college. You get that nurturing environment from professors who pour into you, who will give you that love that you need to be shielded from all the foolishness out there in the world. And you get a chance again to look back on your experience. Homecoming for HBCUs is a respite from the stress of the world because you get to come home and see you survived one more year. Glad you did. Good to see you, brother. You survived one more year. Glad you did. Good to see you, sister. These are the things we have, which allows us to come back and say, man, we made it, right? We were out there in the world, working in the industry, working in politics, doing whatever, and it didn't take us out, right? And so we're going to come back and celebrate that you made it one more year, and I'm glad to see you. Almost like our annual conference is. And are we yet alive? To see each other's face. Every year we gather, right? To say we made it to one more conference year. So for me, that's the beauty and benefit of the HBCU, because my grandfather was the son of a slave, right? A man enslaved, rather. And my great-grandfather was able to see the value of making sure that his children, right, though he was enslaved as a boy, got an education. It was the HBCU that did that. It provided an education to get training they needed to do great and wonderful things. And so for me, that's the value and the benefit. And folks oftentimes ask, well, do we still need HBCUs? As long as there's racism in this world, we will still need HBCUs because they will still provide that protection and that balm, right, from the stress of the world that might otherwise take somebody out.
You know, I see HBCUs much like the church, and I don't want to make a comparison of the two, but at an HBCU, you can make withdrawals and you can make deposits.
Yeah.
Same thing for the church,
Sure.
in particular the AME church. You make your withdrawals and you make it the deposits,
Yeah.
no matter where you are in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's the powerful thing. You know, I laughed to myself when you talk about homecoming
Yeah.
and the general conference, the annual conference, because those two places have one thing in common. Both places you can get good food.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
At the end.
And if I can lift up one person I always lift up every time I talk about HBCUs and talk about the genius of it, a man named Jesse Russell, who went to Tennessee State, graduated, got a degree in electrical engineering, got hired by a company called Bell Labs to help them with a new project they're working on called the mobile phone. Jesse Russell helped them because they could not make the mobile phone profitable because they were using an analog system. So Jesse said, look, give me a team, we'll put it together, we'll put this thing on a digital platform. They said, well, what are you talking about, digital platform? He said, digital signal processing. Jesse Russell, TSU graduate, holds the patents for, although it's old now, 3G and 4G technology, right? But what would have happened if there had not been a nurturing HBCU, right, to wrap their arms around him and provide him with the opportunities he needed to study like he did and develop this technology? And there are thousands of others like this. I just chose one to highlight today that have made great contributions to our society, right? And again, with our church. The AME Church's investment in our schools, again, provides proof positive of the value of HBCUs in this country.
You know, Rev, I won't hold much more of your time, but I do want to have a conversation about the church because the church is still the artery or the nerve center of the black community. It's so important, and you have a unique perspective being a pastor and a publicly elected official. Let's talk about what you have seen as probably the top 2 challenges in the church from your perspective.
Again, going back to this past year, I think it showed us so much of what was needed to be enhanced in the church. The challenge for the church is going to be mobility, right? Is the church mobile enough to keep reaching souls? And by that I mean, is the church mobile technically, right? Can we have services that are online and in person?
Can we meet people where they are?
Yes, sir. Meet them where they are and provide for them the kind of experience that they want to have with their worship, right? More than that, can the church be mobile enough to also meet continually the physical needs of folks, whether it's feeding people or providing shelters for homelessness? Can the church be mobile enough to do that? And can the church be truthful enough with itself that when we see a population shifting in a state, right, businesses will oftentimes make adjustments.
They make adjustments.
If the population moves, you have to make adjustments. So can the church make adjustments when we see populations shifting in the state that our churches may be in, where no longer are we seeing 50 families in a community living around that church, but because of the issue, they may have moved to another city or moved further in that city, and now the commute back and forth to them may not be as it was. And so can the church then say, well, how do we then, again, the mobility, make it available for them to have their worship experience and their full church experience? And can we be mobile enough to also see what other pressing needs are out there? Education around housing, education around health, education around all the issues that are pertinent to our society. So for me, those 2 issues. Can the church be mobile enough to reach folks where they are? And can the church also recognize when population is shifting and make adjustments to that to make sure that we still reach those who are out there?
Rep, my last kind of thought and question before we close out, because I don't want to get in trouble. You know, we don't want to make the audience at home glad twice, glad we sit down, and glad we're getting our butt up. So, your legacy during your tenure, when it's all said and done, as a state rep, you want the people to remember you as what? And as a pastor, you want the folks that you've touched along the way to say what about you?
So as a state rep, I want folks to see me as a champion for our community. And that means so many things. Of course, at the top is fighting for HBCUs, but also fighting for the health of our people, working on issues like sickle cell. I passed a bill this past year making it more ready to get new treatments for persons with sickle cell. We've worked on bills with maternal mortality. It's all about making sure that our folks say, you know what, Harold Love stood up for our community. And here's the proof we have. The bills he passed, the initiatives he worked on were pertinent and important to our community. As a pastor of a church, when I'm no longer the pastor of Lee Chapel or any church, I want the folks to say that Harold Love cared about us getting to know the Lord. And not just in a passing sense of, you know who Jesus is, like you know Antoine who Harold is, yeah. but knowing who Jesus was as their Savior, and not just in a fluffy way, but really knowing that this is who died for their sins. But this is also the one who says you can still have an abundant life, right? You don't have to wait until heaven arrives for you to have this abundant life, but you can have it now. So I want folks to say, yeah, Reverend Love really cared enough to make sure that we knew who Jesus was in our own personal lives.
Doctor, pastor, state representative, AME, our dear brother, Mr. Love, thank you for joining us on the Christian Recorder. To all of you, we'll be back with another one of our Christian Recorded Dialogues from our General Conference Board meeting here in Nashville, Tennessee. We'll see you soon.